There are many legends about the ruins of Baalbek. The monumental 2,000-year-old Temple of Jupiter sits atop 3,000-ton stone blocks. No one seems to know on whose orders it was cut, or why, or how it came to be abandoned. And perhaps the biggest mystery of all is the impracticality of its construction. The temple is a puzzle that has drawn archaeologists from around the world, and a puzzle that won't be solved anytime soon. For political unrest in Lebanon makes it too dangerous for anyone to visit. Could this war be yet another mortal construct of the battle of good and evil? Or is there some great knowledge close to this temple, perhaps a portal or gateway to a higher intelligence that is savagely guarded by all who come to discover it?
Baalbek is one of the big enigmas of which there is very little answers. We're talking about a huge complex that was constructed during Roman times, a massive temple dedicated to the god Jupiter. Amongst the foundations of this incredible complex are stone blocks weighing around 1,000 tons apiece. But the big question comes, did they reuse those stones, those big ones, the 1,000-tonners? That's the thing. And if they did reuse them, who the hell created those stones in the first place, and why so large?
Comment ça a été fabriqué? Comment ils ont pu créer ce...
We wouldn't even be able to reproduce such a structure nowadays. How was it built? How could they have created this huge block of stone?
Some will say that it was superhuman, how these massive stones were carved. It could be done. It could be done with rollers, block and tackle. It would be quite an effort, and there was a reason to do it. The temple is on a hill. You would need very, very strong retaining walls. Huge pieces of stone are useful in that regard, so there's a practical answer. But the more magical speculation is there must have been some special purpose to this location and these massive stones that is beyond our current understanding. The reason for them would be to build very powerful retaining walls so that this temple would last forever.
But why would they want this temple to last forever?
When you simply examine the size of the stones, they're just of such mammoth weight and size that we don't have any cranes today that could even be able to construct them in any sort of way. And here are these stones that apparently were constructed in such a way and just knocked completely over in some sort of massive cataclysm of some kind. We've had stone cutters try, and they interlocked in such a way as to create incredible strength. It's impossible. It's just one of the most fascinating mysteries that we cannot duplicate today. Now, whether or not it was being used as a Stargate or some sort of major military complex, let's say, or a fort of some kind, it's all indicative of the same intelligence that humanity was interacting with.
Could this intelligence have predated mainstream science and conventional historians' conclusions that Baalbek was constructed by the Romans? Graham Hancock believes the larger stones surrounding the temple predate the Roman Empire.
Archaeologists have one thing that they regard as a killer argument for why the Romans must have made the megalithic wall as well as the temple. And that is that in the foundations of the megalithic wall, visible, but in the foundations, is a bit of a Roman temple column. And it's in the foundations of the walls. Come round the corner onto the west side of the wall, and there you find the famous trilithon, which is curious, freestanding, unconnected megalithic wall, which doesn't look much like other Roman stuff, actually. It's the three giant blocks that surrounds the Temple of Jupiter. And each of those blocks weighs more than 900 tons. And they are placed so perfectly into position that you cannot get a sheet of paper into the joints. And they're 20 feet above the ground. So the archaeologists say, look, we've got a temple of Jupiter up on top. We've got a Roman column drum being used as a block in the foundations of the wall. Of course, the whole thing was made by the Romans. What they're not taking account of is the fact that Baalbek was used as a fortress for hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm very strongly of the view that that Roman column drum in the foundations of the megalithic wall surrounding the Temple of Jupiter is a later repair rather than an original block. They found Roman columns lying around all over the place, and they stuffed that in there and used it to repair that wall. So I don't think that that column drum proves that the megalithic wall was the work of the Romans. And then we have another thing, which is if you go to the supposed quarry from which the Baalbek stones were taken, you find 3 really humongous blocks of stone. 2 of them have been well known for the last 100 years or so. One's called, I don't know why, it's called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. I've stood on top of it. When you're on top of it, you're dwarfed by the scale of the thing. This block weighs 1,000 tons. It's sticking up at a kind of angle. It's been cleanly separated from the bedrock underneath. There's a cut, and it's just sitting there. Across the road is a second giant block. That one is calculated to weigh 1,460 tons. Still sitting there in place in the quarry and only discovered by the archaeologists in 2014 because it was covered by sediment. So the archaeologists say the Romans did everything. The Romans made those megalithic blocks. To me, this is, just a very un-Roman thing to do. The Romans were extremely pragmatic people. If they had quarried those blocks, even if they had found they couldn't move them, they would not have left them there. The Romans were never involved with those blocks. They didn't even know those blocks were there. I think we are looking at, if you like, an antediluvian presence at Baalbek. And I think in some way the Romans tapped into that and honored that with their 54 columns around the Temple of Jupiter.
Is it really possible that a megalithic structure was standing at Baalbek years before the time of the Great Deluge? Were these massive stones constructed with the same mathematical codes as the Great Pyramids at Giza? And if so, where does this knowledge come from?
That system of numbers, as a sacred system of numbers, is found in virtually every culture on Earth. Whether they know that it's generated by a key motion of the Earth itself is another question, but that it was part of a sacred system of numbers that had come down from remotest antiquity. I think the Romans were the inheritors of that knowledge as much as anything else. And I think the Temple of Jupiter was placed where it is placed precisely because of that megalithic U-shaped wall that surrounds the Temple of Jupiter on 3 sides. I think they nestled it in to the pre-existing structure.
Temple of Jupiter was built upon older Canaanite temples, which were built on earlier temples, which were built on earlier structures. There's a sect of Maronite Christians that live in Lebanon, and they say that the original structure, whatever it was built by Cain, who was the son of Adam. So that means that whatever original structure had been built there was built very close to the beginning of human life on this planet. But as far as I'm concerned, the beginning of human life on this planet dates back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth, many millions or billions of years ago.
If Baalbek was indeed built on earlier structures, could this be a location that was built by Sumerian gods?
What's so interesting about it is when you look at the original gods from Mesopotamia, how the figures of Enki and Enlil, how they all came to basically take different names. In Greece, thousands of years later, you get Prometheus and you get Zeus. But when you look at what they were said to do, They were said to have done the same things as Enki and Enlil. Then you got the Roman gods, which then grew out of that. So you may be talking about the same gods over a very long period of time. They may be all the same story ultimately.
It does appear to have been a civilization from our solar system that landed and set up shop in this area of Lebanon as well as in Sumer. Baalbek very nicely fits in with reports that we see from the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, that Baalbek had to be one of the central locations where Enlil and Enki were working.
But was Baalbek also the location for some kind of powerful ancient weaponry? And is it more than a coincidence that many of the ancient megalithic structures nearby look to bear the scars of some great battle?
When we look at the state of how Baalbek is today, it is obviously a site that has suffered an incredibly catastrophic level of damage. Now, how did that damage actually take place? One potential theory is that it was the result of some sort of cataclysmic earth change activity. But if that were true, wouldn't it make sense that floodwaters or earthquakes would damage the base of the building? Instead, what we appear to see is that the top of the building has been smashed off and scattered, but the bottom is okay. This may actually be the result of a battle that involved much more of a man-made or extraterrestrial-made weaponry. This structure clearly was built with stones that are so heavy that it was meant to withstand an enormous amount of attack. And that again suggests that it could have been built by people who were at war. And that what we're now seeing is the shattered remnant of what was left behind.
Is it possible this is the remnants of an ancient battle? And could this ancient battle have perpetuated more battles between good and evil?